It is very emotional for any business owner when they sell the business they have built up and developed over a long period of time. For most business owners, it is the largest financial event of their lives, but if the sale is not approached correctly, it could lead to disappointment. This can be prevented through a proper sale readiness assessment prior to the sale of the business. With me is Marcel Gonzalez. He is the Director of Corporate Finance at Merchant Tech Capital, and Micah Miller, a Senior Associate also at Merchant Tech. Gents, thank you so much for joining me. Marcel, I'm going to start with you. What exactly is a sale readiness assessment?
I think for us, it's about a business owner when they're getting ready to sell a business to really think about it as the first step rather than before just going to the market and thinking, who can buy my business? Here's my books, lifting up the bonnet of the car and saying, here, make me a price and sell my business. It's about getting a business owner ready to sell the business and getting the business ready, making it attractive, making sure that when the deal is done, it's the best for all parties involved, and more importantly for the business owner, that they extract the highest value possible for them and any other stakeholders that are involved.
Michael, let's use an example. Say I want to sell a business. When do I start to think about getting a sale assessment done?
You're starting to think about selling a business or disposing of a business. So that is the starting point. As a shareholder, one of your primary objectives will be maximum price for your investment, obviously at the right terms. Now, in order to achieve that, there are several factors that actually need to align within your business and external to your business in order for that to be realized. So the sale readiness assessment is a starting point of that process.
Marcel, how long does that process normally take?
Look, it obviously varies depending on where you are in terms of the life cycle of your business, as well as once we've done the assessment, part of that assessment is letting you know how long we think it will take us to assist you to get ready to go to market. The idea is when you go to market that everything is ready and that the guys can come in and do their due diligence and see exactly the value that we're showing them. A lot of the times when business owners are trying to sell their business, it's almost during the due diligence process themselves that they're trying to sort out some of these issues, which then has a big negative effect on the buyers themselves thinking, is the value really there? Or what are the alarm flags showing here? Why are there different adjustments that need to be made? Or why are they moving certain accounts? Or why are there two sets of accounts in some instances? Whereas as part of the assessment, we'll if it takes 6 months to 12 months, sometimes the business may even be ready for sale because, they run a squeaky clean business and it's an easy business to understand and the corporate governance issues have already been resolved. But a lot of the times there is going to be some work to be taken. And on average, we think probably anywhere between 6 months to 12 months to almost have a full annual financial year that's gone through with the alterations and the suggestions that we've made it in order to make the business as attractive as possible, as well as to extract the maximum value from day one, so that when a buyer comes in and does the due diligence and unpacks everything, they're seeing exactly what we told them was there from the beginning and not trying to understand or make an adjustment of X and an adjustment of Y to try and get to the number and the value that we try to explain to them from the beginning.
So you address the problems prior to the sale transaction actually happening?
Correct. I mean, they've got to leverage off our experience. We've been doing this for many years and we'll almost pretend to be the buyers looking in as part of the assessment to say, what are they looking for? What do they look for that extracts value? What do they look for problem areas? And if we flag those from up front, we can deal with them up front rather than have to have those questions from the buyers, which then they're always trying to use to their benefits to try and reduce any value or pricing.
Michael, what do you actually look at during this whole assessment?
The sale readiness assessment is essentially a 360-degree review of the business, the owner, and the market. So obviously, as an owner, as Marcel mentioned earlier, it's a very emotional experience for an owner to sell a business, typically. Therefore, a lot of the time, they're not really sure whether they're ready or not. So preparing the owner for the journey is essential, Then within the business, we look at several fundamentals, starting with, operational improvements. Who's the leadership? How strong are they? To what degree is the business dependent on the owner, as an example, for leadership, and the workforce, and various other operational metrics that sort of needs to be reported on and managed specifically in order to achieve some of the objectives that the owner has in mind. Then we also look at financials. So Marcel alluded earlier to, squeaky clean books. People want to know that you pay your taxes. People want to know that, you run a clean operation from a financial point of view, clean balance sheets, get the business to the point where there's no unnecessary capital expenditure. Ultimately, that affects value because it's cash outflows. Ultimately, you want to have a track record of audited financial statements, really, so that they are credible to the buyer. We look at tax considerations. What is the group structured like? What are the tax considerations associated with that structure? Obviously looking at potential deal structures and the tax implications associated with that. We look at sales and marketing initiatives. Everybody likes a growth story. Ideally you've got a brand in the industry, that's generating some of that growth story. From a legal perspective, we make sure that, all your contracts are in place, all the agreements are, managed and signed and up to date. And so from a business perspective, we really do a deep dive and do, a really, really thorough review of the various operational initiatives. And then obviously we look external to the business and markets, Obviously, you can't you can't expect maximum price in a diving market, specifically to that sector. So we typically analyze, the volumes of transactions taking place at that point in time, historic, where is the trend going, what sort of values of transactions taking place. So you can really see it as a 360-degree review of the internal and external factors of the business.
I find it interesting that you mention the management of the emotion of the seller or the owner of the business first before actually referring to the financials, because the valuation sometimes are totally based on the financials. How big a problem is the emotion of the seller or the owner?
So typically, 9 out of 10 of our clients have spent 20, 30 years building their businesses. So you can imagine that is very, very close to their hearts. And given the blood, sweat and tears that they have invested in the business, the sacrifices they made with families, you can't quantify that in terms of value that a buyer will see at least. So the owner really needs to come to terms with the idea of disposing of this precious gem that they've got. And that really is fundamental before you start with the process. A lot of the time, as Marcel has mentioned, an owner thinks of disposing of a business when they're not really ready for it. And only when you get to deal stage do they realize they're not actually ready for this. And they need some time to come to terms with what this actually involves.
The whole process can be quite daunting, but is this a common practice in South Africa where a business owner actually goes to do such an assessment? Does it happen often?
Not really in South Africa. We've sort of learned of this type of process through our dealings with the international markets and some of the international transactions we've worked on. We're also part of an international alliance where we deal with a lot of firms of a similar size of ours throughout the world, and we partner with them together to try and get interaction and international deals across the line between matching buyers and sellers. And through that process, we've understood that specifically in the US, Canada, and in a few countries in Europe, that this is a fundamental part of the process to start in the sale process, where a lot of their sale mandates would have started in this process first, where in South Africa, a lot of the times it's not very proactive in terms of sale, it's very reactive when they almost at a forced sale and want to sell their business instead of being proactive, like Michael mentioned earlier. In South Africa, we've even got a term for it where we call it seller's remorse, where it gets, if the deal's taking a bit too long and it gets towards the end of the stage, or it gets close to the signing of the deal, where potentially sometimes there's just a sudden change in heart or change in mindset from the seller, nothing to do with value even, it's just a complete mindset change. Where in the US and Canada, they'll see that that doesn't exist. They don't know what a seller's remorse is when we try and mention that to them. It's very unique to the markets that potentially don't have this proactive step to understand and go through the process to what it means. It also helps in reducing that valuation estimate, the gap in terms of what the seller thinks the business is worth compared to what the price is going to come on the table from some of the buyers. If we've done the assessment for them before, we've basically told them, as your business stands, this is where the value is. If you do these 3 or 4 or 5 recommended steps, you could get the value up to here. At that stage, there's no commitment for them to have to go to market or sell their business, and that's one of the beauties of the sale readiness assessment. You don't have to go to market at the end of the process. You can then take in, you've got a full report, you can look at it, you can do some of the recommendations if you want, and you can then take the next step once you've processed that. And that helps to remove some of that seller's remorse, as well as then when he does go to market, the valuation gap is no longer there.
Michael, we live in an interesting world. We had a poor performing economy before the onset of COVID-19. And over the past few months, we've seen many businesses actually suffer significantly due to the lockdown. Does this sale readiness assessment tie into those businesses or are applicable to those businesses who are in distress as opposed to a normal sale, if you want to call it like that, where you actually just want to sell the business for another reason?